All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. All right, thanks for coming out tonight, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I first came to San Antonio in 2019 on the Texas convention, or the the Texas Bonsai Federation traveling artist kind of tour. So it was. Yeah, thank you. It was in this very room. We did a big Elm workshop, so it's fun to be back and to have done several club meetings with you all. So I really appreciate you having me, and it's always fun to come to San Antonio. Tonight we're going to work on a Texas Persimmon. This is a male plant. Persimmons are a dioecious species, which means they are gendered. They have a female and a male. If you want a lot of fruit on your female tree, you need to have a male like this. So if you don't have one, buy some raffle tickets from Kevin in the back, because my philosophy with dioecious plants is that even though that you have to have it in your garden to get a good fruit set, you probably want your male stud plant to look pretty as well. So we're going to try and take this male stud plant, make it look as pretty as it can so it looks really nice on a bonsai bench. So when you have it next to your female persimmon, it's not too much of an eyesore. So we're going to work on this tree tonight. We don't want to work on a plant that doesn't look lush and green, and so this one has all of those characteristics, so it's a really good tree for us to work on. This is probably the first time it's ever had its major thinking for bonsai. So oftentimes when we're working on a piece of broadleaf material, we have to hit the reset button to a small degree to reset it from the garden center kind of training that it was on in the past to what we consider beautiful for bonsai. When I say the word bonsai, that's a word that kind of triggers a lot of meaning. Not everything is a bonsai. Not every potted tree is a bonsai. A bonsai does have a rule and a formula to it. That doesn't mean there's not flexibility in the art form, but there's a lot of container plants that aren't necessarily considered bonsai. So since we're in the San Antonio Bonsai Club, we're going to turn this into the nicest bonsai that we can. And I think we have a pretty decent tree in here. When we're working with nursery stock, like I said, we tend to have to hit the reset button, and so this is the best reset button that we have in our toolbox for a piece of nursery stock. This is a silky saw. There's a lot of fancy bonsai tools that you can buy. I recommend almost none of them. The Pocket Boy from Silky, you can buy this on Amazon for about $20, $30, is better than any bonsai saw that you can buy. And it's a pretty good tool for what we're going to need here. So oftentimes when we're hitting the reset button on bonsai, this is kind of the first tool in our arsenal for attacking something like this. And when I'm looking at this, I'm looking for what is redundant, what is going to catch my eye that's not maybe necessary. Where do we have a nice trunk line in this tree? That's the first thing that I'm kind of looking for is where's a beautiful trunk line in this piece of material. And when we look at this, we have kind of four trunk lines that are coming up, and that's probably a little bit too many to have, so we want to simplify that just a bit. So I think a really beautiful line on this tree is we have this small trunk right here, this little guy, that actually has some really nice, beautiful movement, and so I think we'll keep that. Now, we have another trunk here that's kind of mirroring that trunk kind of nicely. When we have multiple trunk lines, we want them to have a nice harmonious feeling. We don't want it to look like they didn't grow together naturally. And so I think we have two that are going to work really nicely together. And then we have some redundant kind of trunk lines over here that maybe compete with the things that we have on this side of the plant that are a little bit too crazy, too boring. So the very first move I think we're going to make is we're going to get rid of that excess, and then we're going to see what beautiful tree we have kind of left. So oftentimes too, a piece of nursery stock resetting like this can be a little bit of a fast operation. So we might not need the full 2 hours tonight to work on this tree. Sometimes it can be pretty fast, sometimes we can spend a long time. So let's get started here and see kind of where we're at. I think we're going to start by cutting this big piece off here. And then I'm going to tell you why we're cutting it off again too. So let's get this out of here. Now, what I have left is that I have two trunk lines that have a fairly similar kind of movement. When this was on here, it was kind of, again, it was a little too jarring. We had 3 trunks, 1, 2, and 3 that were pretty much the same size, which is a big no-go on a multiple trunk plant. Now, what we could have done is left one of them to grow for a long time to thicken up, and so we have a little bit more variation. However, if any of you have ever grown persimmon, these thicken up very, very, very slowly. So even though it looks like I just butchered this tree, I saved you a lot of time, whoever wins this tree down the road. So we'll get rid of that excess part that we don't need, and now we can kind of study the more beautiful trunk line that we have left. The bonsai that we have left, or the future bonsai that we have left, is kind of a natural mother-daughter style. We have a main trunk, we have a smaller trunk, we have variation in trunk size, which is important. We have a nice kind of harmonious movement between the 2 trunks, which is important. And so we have a really good kind of start here on both of these trees. I like these 2 main trunk lines now. The next thing that we move to, now that we've kind of checked the trunk line box, is where do we have branches that are maybe usable or not usable? On this tree here, we have a lot of these nice low branches that have a thinness that makes them flexible for us to work on, to put good movement in. 2 big things that we're looking for in bonsai are taper and movement. So if a branch has neither, we tend to have to eliminate it and cut it back to something that we can grow with taper and movement. And obviously, when this was being grown in a piece of, or a nursery or garden center, they weren't pruning this to have either of those things. They were just keeping this as a big kind of bush for someone to plant in their yard. But alas, Kevin bought it, and now it's going to be a bonsai. So we are going to work and edit some of the top branching that we have. If we look at the top of this tree, everything is pretty coarse and heavy. Again, 2 things that we don't want. If in bonsai we're trying to have this plant mimic a beautiful old Texas persimmon you might see in the hill country, and those trees in the hill country are going to have much more natural taper and movement because they're growing much more slowly. And when we try and shrink the scale of that big Texas persimmon down to just 1 or 2 feet, we have to do a lot of unnatural things to make this look natural. So we're going to start by doing some of that, which is coming in with our pruners and taking back a lot of this big, heavy stuff. A Texas persimmon, and really all persimmon, is it's a moderately strong plant. It's not the most aggressive tree that we work with. It's not a ficus. We have to be semi-conservative with working on one of these trees. So one strategy when we have something like that is I'm going to cut it back to where I see a little bit of green everywhere. And then we let the tree respond with some growth, and then we can take it back a little further. So basically what I'm going to do is all these heavy, big, straight sections up here, I'm going to just start nibbling a little bit away at some of these back to where I see green. Now, I told you this is going to be a fairly quick demonstration because this like we said, this tree, we're hitting the reset button to a degree. And so I can take my time pruning this, and that's something with any deciduous or broadleaf material that I think people get wrong, is they feel like they have to make the perfect cut the first time. You don't always have to do that. You can kind of, because this is only going to take 30 minutes to prune back, we don't necessarily have to cut perfectly. Sometimes just getting some of this bulk out of the way can allow us to see into the tree a little bit better and make better decisions. So I'm just starting by removing some excess, some length, and then we'll dive in and kind of see what we have underneath here. So any questions while I'm kind of getting started here? Does anyone have Texas persimmon?
How can you tell if it's a male?
How can we tell if it's a male? Because someone told me it was. But I did see a couple fruit on here, which means well, maybe they're not fruit, maybe they were flowers, but there is a little either flower or fruit kind of forming there. The persimmon that we normally work with in bonsai, or that I normally work with in bonsai, is princess persimmon, royagaki, which they use a lot in Japan. Those have a little bit of a different look than these Texas persimmons. But do they have a different flower shape?
The female flowers are farther apart
Okay. So this one might not have enough flowers for us to really be able to tell, but it does have some flowers on it. So if you end up winning this tree in the raffle, you can report back and let us know what it is. So we're starting to just whittle. I'm not too concerned about making the perfect cut. I'm just getting a lot of this excess off, like I said, so I can bring this back. Now, here we have a tree that is relatively thin trunked. So with a thin trunk tree, I don't want to have a silhouette that is incredibly wide. That doesn't feel natural. The skinnier the tree, the tighter the silhouette should be to that trunk. If you think of a bunjin style, or what some people call literati, real small, elegant, skinny trunk and the branches are really, really close, tucked into the tree. No, it's okay. Thank you. The thinner the trunk, the tighter the branches are. The thicker the trunk, the more the branches can reach out and create a nice broad kind of crown. So this is a really skinny trunk. So this foliage mass that we have here, and the mass that we had when we definitely started this tree, was way too big for this trunk size to logically make sense. So we have to really compact this quite a bit to balance the size of the trunk. So that's what I'm getting started with, is coming in, pruning back and chasing the growth back in. Again, all I'm doing right now is pruning to where I have a little bit of green further in on the branch. Any questions while we're whittling this back?
Can you use those cuttings to start another plant?
You can take cuttings from persimmon. Now the best cuttings to take from persimmon are actually root cuttings. The reason that we're cutting a lot of these off is they're pretty boring. There's not a lot of taper and not a lot of movement. And so even though you could root this as a bonsai, it's still going to have the same problem here as it does on the big tree. But if we repot this tree, and this is how most princess persimmon bonsai in Japan are propagated, is when they repot it, especially these big nursery stock ones are great candidates. When you get big roots that are curling around and twisty and contorted, you take that contorted root, when you cut it off and you repot this thing, and you stick it halfway in the soil, halfway out of the soil, and 9 out of 10 times that's going to sprout and create a new tree. And so you can actually get really beautiful things better than we could ever wire ourselves by getting some crazy kind of root designs. And that's a really, really good way to propagate. So we'll make a pretty nice tree out of this, but probably an even higher quality tree that you can make if you win this tree in the raffle is from a root cutting that you have down here, especially if you like shohin, little tiny trees with a lot of compact movement. Shohin from persimmon is a really, really good strategy. There's other trees that you can make from root cuttings. So a lot of you have elms down here. Elm is a fantastic species for bonsai in Texas. If you have an elm tree and you repot it and you have the same kind of thing, some twisty, gnarly roots, again, stick about half of the root in the soil, half of the root out of the soil. It'll sprout, and then you get something that has some crazy nice movement for free, something that we would normally just throw in the trash. So we're starting to chase this in and make this a little bit more proportionate. Have a little bit more nibbling to do. Other questions? Y'all are a quiet crowd tonight. This is.
You're talking about Texas?
Yeah.
Texas plant, Texas trees.
Yep.
I got a bottle brush and I was really interested if that could be worked on as a bonsai.
Bottle brush. Yes, it has a fairly big flower, and so it can. You probably don't want that big flower on a little tiny tree. But as a fairly large bonsai, it might look nice. So it's not something that we tend to see a lot of, which means people have been doing bonsai for a very long time, and so the things that we tend to see a lot of are the ones that work really well for bonsai, that behave in a pot, that are going to backbud when we prune them and respond when we repot them, and all these things. And so usually it's a good clue. If you don't see a lot of it as a bonsai, then it might be something that's a little bit more tricky and hard to deal with. Now, you won't see a lot of it in Japan because most Japanese bonsai is from a climate that has much better seasons than we have here in Texas. But if we look at a country like Taiwan, which has a much more tropical climate and a climate that has trees much more similar to what you can grow here, then they still don't really use it that much. So that might be a kind of a red flag for me. I wouldn't avoid using it, but there's probably a reason that we don't see a lot of examples of it. Good question, though.
I was told about collecting Texas persimmons during the summer. Would you avoid that, or would you rather do late winter, or?
You know, that's a better question for someone who's collected more of them than I have. Usually when I collect broadleaf trees, I like to collect them in the fall. Again, I'll defer to anyone in the crowd who's collected a bunch of these because I have never collected a Texas persimmon.
I collected two when they were both in early, I should say late winter. And I collected three, and two of them are still living.
If you collect in the fall, do you just protect them from freeze?
I do, yeah. So anything that I collect in the fall at home goes onto a heat mat for the duration of winter, because I get a lot more freezing weather than you guys do here. Anytime you get one of those cold weather fronts that come through, I would throw a heat pad under it and turn it on, just as a nice bit of insurance. I prefer collecting in the fall because where I collect, and everything is deeply contextual in bonsai. So my context of collecting is when I collect in the fall, there's no snow on the mountain. When I collect in the spring, I have to collect in June or July on the mountain, which means it's spring up there and it's already kind of the heat of summer down at my house. So the tree gets into a little bit of a shock. At that time, it's also just hard to access with snow load and whatnot where I'm collecting. So fall for what I'm collecting tends to always work better just for access of material. But what you don't want to do with a broadleaf plant, in my experience, is just collect during any active growth. If the tree has an active growth tip and we do a lot of root cutting, then that can cause a lot of trauma to the tree. I know Ken Schindler, who does a lot of collecting here in Texas, likes to collect in spring, which is a great time. Where he's collecting, there's not a lot of snow, so he can go right before they leaf out, collect the trees and get them and bring them back. But we don't necessarily have that privilege up in the Cascades where I'm collecting. So, good question. Now, we're getting this kind of compact to where it's more in balance with the trunk size. Now, the other issue that we have here is that we have our main tree, we have our small tree, and while we have nice movement that's harmonious, and while we have nice trunk sizes that are different, the height is still the same on both of these. So the next step is to make our daughter more of a daughter and reduce the height on it. We don't have from here to here, it's essentially the same trunk thickness all the way up. So there's not a lot of taper here. So what we might do is get started somewhere around here by getting that knocked back. Have a few buds here that are kind of active. I think that's a fairly good start. I'm basically looking, and this sounds maybe a little too simple and bad of me as a teacher, but I'm looking for where I start to get bored. And when my eye follows this all the way up, that was I was definitely bored at that point. I might be a little bit bored still in this range. Again, this is bad teaching, but that's the simplistic version of what I'm looking for. And that feels like a nice kind of height for this daughter tree. Now, conifers and broadleaf trees are a little bit different in this type of style. When we have a mother-daughter style, a conifer will have a very distinct mother and a very distinct daughter. And that mother and daughter will have their own crowns. They will have their own kind of key branches, their own kind of pad design. On a deciduous plant or a broadleaf tree, that's very different. A broadleaf deciduous and a broadleaf evergreen will have a mother-daughter that grows as if it's just one silhouette. It won't have its kind of separate kind of trunk. So this will eventually just act as if it's a side branch, and it will create the side branches that we would have on this side of the tree. This, we would have some branches over here come to the other side, and so this will just create a full kind of mass. Whereas if it was a conifer, we would have a very kind of different and distinct kind of mother-daughter design. The reason that we do that is because it's natural. If you plant 2 oak trees next to each other and let them grow freely, they will grow as if there's one silhouette, one crown. If you plant 2 pine trees next to each other, they will look like they're 2 separate Christmas trees, even in kind of late maturity. So a broadleaf tree, we tend to have it be a little bit more blended versus a conifer. We tend to have it be very distinct. So we're getting here on this tree. Any questions?
That would be repotted when?
This will be repotted. It's probably a little bit too leafed out to repot now. So if you buy some raffle tickets from Kevin in the back and you win this tree, I'd recommend repotting it in the next spring. So spring for you in Texas is January or February. So we're in what an Oregonian defines as summer right now down here. So.
Collecting, so after you collect, what soil do you use for broadleaf? Or what do you
Good question. So most of the time when I collect a broadleaf tree, it's collected from the wild as a fully bare root plant. And in that case, because it's fully bare root, I put it into my 100% bonsai soil mix from the get-go. And I've never lost a broadleaf tree collecting in that way. So I bare root it when it's in collection. I use a black trash bag just to keep it hydrated from the time it comes out of the hole in the mountain to my backyard in my studio where I pot it up. I take the bag off and I put it right into bonsai soil. Oftentimes it can go right into a pot because we do a lot of root pruning on broadleaf trees. Now that's very different than conifers. If you're going to go in the hill country and collect ash junipers, or if you're going to go up in the Rocky Mountains and collect some conifers, you don't do that. You do not bare root. It's a very different process, but for a broadleaf tree, you're often getting a bare rooted plant. And because it's bare rooted, I put it right into my bonsai soil mix. And that mix that I use is about 80% akadama and about 20% pumice. So, all right. Yeah, BLM land, so the Bureau of Land Management, which is more of a West Coast kind of thing, or sometimes National Forest as well. So, we do get a permit. For a while in the National Forest, during COVID years, they didn't want people coming into the park ranger office, so they said anything under 2 feet is fair game, basically. You could print off a permit online, basically. With National Forest land, you go to the ranger station, you get a permit, and there's usually, you know, the type of trees that I'm collecting typically are the trees that they don't want. And usually what they're mostly trying to prevent is collecting in certain zones. So when you collect, they might give you a stipulation. You can collect anything that's within 300 feet from a road, or you can collect anything in this little area, or you can pay us a fee and collect, you know, only 1 or 2 things. But sometimes in Oregon, people will get a Christmas tree permit because where I live, there's lots of pine trees growing everywhere, and you can a lot of people go into the mountains and get their Christmas tree rather than go to a farmer. So you can get a Christmas tree permit, and that actually, if you read the fine print, that works for collecting bonsai. So sometimes people do that. But yeah, just public land, and just check in with, if you check in with somebody in public land, a park ranger or something, they're probably going to be very confused about what you're doing. But yeah, just kind of explain it to them, and I'm sure they'll work with you and get you what you need. So, other questions?
What's your favorite species to collect?
Favorite species to collect? I have a good answer for that. The nicest trunk I can find. So when I go collecting, I'm not looking for this or that. I'm not looking for a Texas Persimmon. I'm not looking for a vine maple. I'm looking for what has the best potential for bonsai, regardless of whatever plant it was. When I used to go collecting, I would get very frustrated because I would only be looking for a vine maple or something, and I would go out collecting and I would not find one that kind of met my kind of what I was looking for and my criteria. And once I started looking for quality rather than this or that, then I started finding things that I never thought I would want. So a lot of what I'm collecting lately are mountain poplars or cottonwoods. So those have been a surprise, but I've been finding really, really nice trunks on those. And When I look it up, nobody's ever done poplar as a bonsai, which is probably for a good reason, like we talked about with the other plant. They're more of what I call a sport bonsai, which means they don't behave well as a bonsai. So if anything gets shaded out, they tend to die. But if you can find a really nice trunk, it's always worth the effort. So I'm mostly just looking for quality regardless of kind of anything. So if I went collecting, I'm looking for quality. I'm looking for interest in something that's in this size range. So that's kind of my thing. If you're looking for Texas persimmon when you go collecting, oftentimes you collect the first Texas persimmon you find, or maybe the second or the third one, and you bring it home and you're like, why did I collect that? That's not a very good tree. It's the best that I found out there, but it's still maybe not a very good tree. So I'm always looking for something of quality, and that's kind of my main criteria. So, all right. But things that work well here, Texas persimmons are great. I really, really like the elms that Ken Schindler collects. So come to the convention in Corpus Christi because I think there's a workshop with maybe those elms, or go talk to Ken, who's probably going to be vending there, I might guess. Or he lives in, Richardson, something like that. He collects some really, really fantastic trees. If I was here, I would be trying to get some cedar elms. Okay, so we've cut back the top pretty aggressively. I think we're getting to where the first reset of this tree is. Some of these are still a little bit too long and coarse and knobby, but we cut it back to where we have green, and because I like to actually give you something that's going to survive when you take it home, when it in the raffle, this is where I would do it. We could cut this back further, make it look a little bit better, and be operating at a little bit more risk. And so rather than do that, we're gonna give you something that has a really good fighting chance. So far, everything that we've done to this tree, in my opinion, has zero risk on the plant's health. Now, aftercare can actually be pretty important. And so even though we're not done yet, I'm gonna do some wiring on it. Let's just talk a little bit about aftercare. When this tree had all these branches up here, they were shading out all these leaves that I just cut back to. And so if you take this tree and you put it in the strong Texas sun, all these leaves are going to fry. It's like an Oregonian who comes here from 40-degree weather and gets blasted by Texas heat. It's not a good combo. So if we take this out, put it in the strong Texas sun, this will fry. So whoever wins this tree, again, go see Kevin in the back to buy some tickets. But whoever wins this, put it in the shade for a week or two, maybe even 3, and then you can slowly start to ease it out into the sun. Maybe you start by a little bit of morning sun for a few days, and then you can beef it up a little bit. A Texas persimmon in general in your climate should either be under 60% shade cloth or above in all day light, or morning sun and afternoon shade. So let's do a little bit of wiring on this tree. Now that we've kind of hit that reset button pretty well. Now, whenever I prune something off, trees change in flexibility throughout the year. So first of all, different species have different flexibilities. So if you ever wire a winterberry, a deciduous holly, or anything in the holly family, you guys have a lot of Yalpan hollies down here. Those are very, very snappy plants. Versus something like a ficus is incredibly flexible. So depending on the species, that kind of determines how flexible it is. And then the time of year also determines that as well. This is actually a pretty good time of year to bend plants. When we bend in the winter, they tend to be a lot more stiff. During the growing season, when there's a lot more sap flow, they tend to be a little bit more flexible. So whenever you prune a lot of stuff off a tree and you're about to wire something, use it as a test and see where the breaking point is. Sometimes a tree, like a ficus, will give you a warning. It will start to tear a little bit. Something like a Yalpan holly will just snap with no warning. So I'm going to just use this as a test. This gave me a little bit of a warning. I saw the bark begin to tear. So this is just a good practice. Whenever you have some trimmings of a tree and you're about to wire, just kind of see where the limit is. Kind of feel it, text it, feel it, kind of get a good kind of a handle on it and see how flexible this is. Now this tree is very flexible right now. So I know that's already told me that I can wire a few of these things fairly easily. So let's get some wire on this plant. For deciduous or broadleaf evergreens, we like to use wire that is aluminum and wire that is roughly the same size as the branch. If you're using aluminum wire that's smaller than the size of the branch, you're probably not going to have the control that you want to bend something and place it where you need to. So let's go through and figure out where to wire some of these things. Now, I'm not going to do a lot of wiring up top here because some of this might get reset a little bit more. Some of these thicker branches might get pruned back about 50% more on top. So there's not a lot of use in wiring a lot of these things. However, these lower branches, there's quite a big benefit because these are more sustainable for where this tree is actually going to be. So we'll wire a few of these lower branches, start to get a little bit of shape in, so they have quite a bit more movement. We can't add taper to a branch, but we can always add movement with some wire. So we're going to start with a few of those smaller ones. Say that one more time. How do the lower branches do with?
How did you choose which lower branches to keep?
I don't think I pruned off any low branches. So I left almost all of them. Now, we probably don't need all of them, but again, because I want whoever wins this in the raffle to take it home and have success, and because of the stage of development that this tree is in, we leave more options. And that's something where a lot of people kind of have challenges or problems with bonsai is they try and do the finished work on an early tree. And with a plant like this, that's a big mistake. You want to leave yourself more options so as this develops down the road, we might spend, the next 30, 40 minutes putting some wire on this plant. And we might end up wiring things that get cut off later, but we're setting ourselves up for better options down the road. It's like we're going to invest in, maybe the stock market's a bad analogy right now, but we're going to invest in multiple stocks down here. This is the Vanguard total stock market. We're just going to play safe, bet on the whole branching that we have here on this tree. That way I don't go all in on Tesla and have it crash and burn and whatnot. So we're going to leave ourselves a lot of options, and then the more developed this tree gets, the more we can start to edit those options down. On something like a juniper, some of those options can later be turned into gin. So when we're growing a young juniper bonsai, we tend to wire absolutely every branch, never cut a branch off. And later down the road, we might only keep 10% of the branches that we have. The other 90% of the branches get turned into gin, and that gin has really nice movement built in. So we don't tend to have gin on a Texas Persimmon. So we will end up in the long run wasting some time because we don't need all of these branches, but we're going to use them for today because it's going to keep the tree healthy. So that's a big thing. It's going to help the tree survive. And it's going to give us great options for down the road so that we can make the best bonsai possible.
What size wire?
The right size. I pulled, let's see, this is a 2. So the correct answer is I pulled the same size wire as the branch that we're trying to bend, which in this case is about a 2. And we'll go in and start wrapping this wire on. Other questions?
Well, what's your plan for getting taper on those stubs? Time frame?
Up here? The plan on these stubs up here is to cut them back a little bit farther so that thickness isn't carried out so far. So probably most of these stubs up here will get cut back another 50% once we get a response from this tree. By pruning here, I'm going to pop some buds down here. Once I get a bud come out, whoever wins this tree can then prune that back maybe later this fall. And then that bud that pops out can be grown. This one actually has one, so we theoretically could cut this one back a little bit more. And so to answer your question, this little guy, once this grows about half the thickness of where it's coming from, that taper will start to blend nicely. And so then this stub that we leave can be cut back a little bit more. What was that? Yeah. One more time, sorry.
It'll be a long time frame before you get the next one.
It is. Yeah, that's why. For this tree to be a nice looking bonsai, if it was in my backyard in Portland, it would probably be. Oh, and one other thing is we can define a nice bonsai in multiple ways. So in 3 years, I could have this in the, probably 3 or 4 years, I could have this in a club show. In about 5 years, I could have it in the convention show. In about 10 to 12 years, I could have it at maybe the US National. And in about 20 years, I could have it at the Pacific Bonsai Expo. So, in about 30 years or 40 years, I could win a prize at maybe the national show. So good bonsai is different depending on what bar we're kind of aiming for.
On branches that come out like with a more extreme angle vertically,
Uh-huh.
do you have any tips to control those, or do you not even waste your time trying to shape those down?
Yeah, sometimes we don't negotiate with aesthetic terrorism. So if you have a branch that's just coming out at a really bad angle, sometimes there's no better choice than just cut it off flat. This is the challenging thing with material selection is we went to a garden center, we got a trunk that has nice size, so yay, we saved a bunch of time. However, we have maybe some issues here. So it's always that equation of, if we started with maybe a root cutting from this tree, and let's say we start with a little something like this, it's got some nice movement that we build in on here. Yes, it's gonna take a long time for this trunk to thicken up, but if we stay on top of it, we don't build in any flaws. So we ultimately end up with a very, very high quality tree when we start with something young. The older something is that we start with, like a collected tree or a nursery stock tree, the more the quality is kind of set in stone as the wood and the tissue kind of form. So yeah, we could always take a root cutting off of this and grow a prize-winning U.S. national tree from something like this. But because of the material that we started with, we are always a little bit limited. This will probably never be a national show winning tree because of the decision that was made when this tree was purchased. But that's not to say this can't be a tree that gets into the national show and is a very pleasing tree and is a nice, attractive stud plant for all our female persimmons to get them some nice fruit too. So this can still be an incredibly nice bonsai, but every time we buy a piece of material, especially if it's an older piece of material, that there is some quality set in stone or in wood in our case. So. The other thing that's tricky with this, and let me give you a little demo since we have some time, is where we bend a wired branch is really important, especially on deciduous and broadleaf trees. If you're wiring a conifer, if you're wiring a pine or a juniper, you can wrap that wire on and bend it wherever the heck you want. And there's no kind of issue there because those trees tend to be fairly flexible. Deciduous and broadleaf trees tend to be a lot less flexible. Their cambium layers tend to be quite a bit thinner. So we have to be very cautious where we bend a wired branch. We can't just put our wire on beautifully and just bend it wherever we want because we're setting ourselves up for maybe some potential failure. So I have a branch that has a piece of wire on it like this. If I'm gonna bend this branch, I wanna bend it let's say I wanna bend it down. I need to bend it down where I have wire supporting on the top side, so it's kind of anchoring that bend. Let me show you what that means. If I'm going to bend it down, this is a really good spot to bend because that wire there is going to protect where that branch naturally would want to break. So this wire here is protecting that bend, protecting this from breaking. So I'm very intentional about where I'm bending a wired branch. If we do the opposite and I bend it where I don't have that, what tends to happen is it snaps, because there's nothing kind of supporting that. It wasn't as dramatic because this tree's a little bit more flexible, but that is very, very common. So when you have a wired branch, be very cautious to bend where you have wire kind of supporting the opposite side of that bend. That's a big, big thing for deciduous trees that not a lot of people mention because most people work on conifers for a living. Most of your traveling bonsai artists are more conifer oriented. So we're always having wire protect the opposite sides of those bends. That's really, really critical. So if you're having a lot of issues with your trees breaking when you bend them, that's one of the best things that can help. One of the other good things that can help is using the right size wire for the branch and also having a really strong anchor. And so that's why we tend to focus a lot on where we plan putting the wire so that we have nice anchor spots. Meaning, what I mean by anchoring is when I move this branch, this isn't moving because it's nicely anchored around that trunk. If you're bending one branch and another branch is moving, then you have a really high likelihood of something breaking because it's not a really good hold or anchor. So, we're just getting some of these set up nicely. Again, just following that rule. What I like to do, mostly we tend to bend things down, mostly in bonsai. And so I like to always have my finger on the downside where the wire is not touching and have the wire on the upside. So I'm getting a nice kind of bend. So we're just getting a little bit of movement kind of built in to these. Let's go to some bigger branches now. This one's a little stiff. This is a little bit borderline for a branch that I like to wire. Probably higher qualities to cut back and grow with a little bit more taper, but because we have buds there activated, we're gonna give this a go with our wiring. We might not be able to get the movement that we want, but we're gonna give it a try. So, any questions while I'm working on this one? Yeah.
Yeah, when you actually start to repot one like this, are you still looking at the same orientation as that, or are you looking at orienting it more straight with it?
Good question. With a piece of nursery stock like this, there's potential that we're going to find a lot more trunk when we dig down here. It already looks like there's a little bit more down here than what we can fully see. So that might interpret how I plant it. If I see kind of a big root kind of go in one direction, then I might want to expose that or tip it up or tip it down. So we need a little bit more data to answer that question in a good way. But the orientation that it is not bad. I think what a lot of people, and again, people tend to make a mistake of trying to have all the answers right away with a young piece of material. This tree doesn't necessarily need a front that's set in stone and kind of solid. It's nice to have a good idea, and so the front of this tree is probably going to be where we see these two branches or these two trunks nicely. So we have a good idea for the front, but I don't let myself get attached to anything at this stage because I'm mostly just interested in putting good movement and putting good information into this tree so that I have good options for down the road. And down the road, I'll be able to make those decisions a little bit better when I have more data to add to that equation. It sounds like a cop-out answer, but we really don't need to have a front right away. Which is counter to what you probably hear. A lot of people come and say, yo, the first thing with bonsai is pick your front, right? But I'm more interested in making something better than what it was before. And oftentimes with a young piece of material especially, which a lot of people have, we just need to make it better so that we have more data for when we go to actually decide where the front is. There's a lot of people that do kind of instant bonsai, kind of fake bonsai, and that's not what I'm about. When I have a tree like this in front of me, I'm already thinking, how do I make this the best tree possible? How do I make this, even though it's a humble piece of material, someone will pay $5, $10, $20 for on a raffle ticket and win this tree. I'm thinking, how do I make this a $5,000 to $10,000 tree? That's where I am in my head. And so I'm not just doing things kind of for show or for fun. I'm doing exactly what I would be doing in my studio if you put this tree in front of me. So, all right. I think we're going to need one more wire on this just since it's fairly big. Any other questions? Persimmons always have a fairly small trunk. That you never really see big, chunky, fat trunk persimmons. It's not that they don't exist, it's just not common. So these actually work well as a little bit of a thinner trunk plant. And one of the reasons that they can work well is when this tree won't necessarily have fruit unless you can graft a female onto here. So let's say you won this tree, you were heartbroken that it's a male. Again, we don't know for sure that it's a male, but that's our theory. You can actually graft female onto this plant. And that is fairly common in Japan. And it's actually quite easy to do. So sometimes what people will also do on a dioecious plant, I just did this a few weeks ago. Actually with John, who was out visiting me and took a class at my house, is we took a male holly branch and we thread grafted it onto a female plant so that that plant can kind of self-pollinate. And so that's very, very common to do. Okay, get a couple of these small ones wired and then we'll be in good shape. Any other questions? This does have, even though it's got some heaviness up here, this really does have nice trunk line to it. I would be perfectly fine having this as a male stud plant on my bench. What?
You would like it as
This does have some nice quality to it. I think this is going to be a fairly nice bonsai.
What kind of stud fees would you charge?
Ooh. Good question.
Big Texas, big bucks.
Yeah, big bucks.
Does that need to be tilted forward a little bit or upright?
What was that?
Does that need to be tilted more upright?
Probably. If this side is our front, and because we have a lot of branches in the back here, those are going to work maybe nicely for depth. So I have a suspicion this might be a potential front down the road. Then yeah, it is leaning back, and we might want to lean this a little bit more forward when we pot it. But that's a good. Actually, we have a sandbag here, so we can give us that kind of feeling to it. Yeah, that already feels just a little bit better. Okay. What I like to do too is I might get a little bit of movement in some branches, but I mostly like to get a lot of things wired before I get too crazy kind of setting things. So we have our top fairly reset up here. I'm going to whittle this back just a little bit more. Again, on this tree, again, for health, we're cutting back to where we have green. So whoever wins this in the auction, I think you have a really high chance of success. Oftentimes when people do demos, that's it. Bring it back next year. Yeah, we'll do part 2. That's really the part 2 and part 3 and part 4 is really the secret of bonsai. I like to think of bonsai as a 401k. Which again, maybe this is a bad analogy for right now, but just stay with me for one moment. I think of bonsai as a 401k. Every time I work on a tree like this, I'm making one contribution. And if you're smart, you're not freaking out right now because it's a long game, right? It's not what happens in the moment. Don was telling me today it only matters when you buy and when you sell. And in between, it doesn't matter at all. So right now, we're just making one contribution to this aesthetic 401k. This is not a bonsai right now. A bonsai is when I have several contributions contributed to this aesthetic account. And like a 401k, it doesn't look very sexy when you start contributing, but if you stick with it, you keep contributing a lot of contributions down the road, eventually you start to get something that you're pretty proud of. And so that's how I tend to think of bonsai is I don't think of it as an instant thing. This isn't an instant bonsai right now. Obviously, it looks a lot different than how it started, but I think of this as a more kind of long-term approach. So we'll play with a few things here. Now, let's see. Something that you'll notice with deciduous and broadleaf trees especially is the movement that you get for free is up. If you look at almost every single one of these branches, it's pretty upright. So when I'm wiring, I'm mostly bending things down because that's the thing that I'm not getting from how the plant naturally grows in a small scale. Things will grow down in nature as branches get heavy, as growth kind of stabilizes and gets settled, but up is not something that, up is something that we get for free in bonsai. So I'm trying to set branches fairly downwards because that's going to do a couple things. It's going to make it look like an older plant or an older tree. It's also going to create better bonsai quality growth. If I have a branch that's growing straight up, then it's going to get a lot of sun. It's going to have a lot of auxin formed in that bud tip, the apical meristem, and that's going to make everything strong and make everything weak down below it. That's not a good recipe for bonsai. For bonsai, if we lay something down, everything below that apical meristem gets stronger, and so you get more balanced growth and you get more bonsai quality growth. You get shorter leaves, smaller internodes. You get more compact growth. So laying things down in bonsai is a really good approach to get nice quality branches. And in fact, if we study broadleaf bonsai, I was just in Japan for 10 days in January with Jay Nolan back there, and we went to 28 different bonsai gardens. Yeah. There's one style of bonsai that they have the branches perfectly upright. That's a ginkgo. We call that a flame style. Every other broadleaf tree in the Japanese bonsai canon has branches that mostly go out. And so there's a reason for that. They don't do that just because it doesn't work. They do that because people have learned over generations of doing this art form that creates the growth that we're kind of after and looking for in bonsai. Again, when I say the word bonsai, that means something specific. And that specific thing is what those people have kind of learned. So we're gonna...
Do you mind if some people get up and start?
Yeah, let's take a break now. I think we have it mostly wired. Afterwards, we'll talk about aftercare and maybe a few other fun things along the way too. So let's take a quick break, grab some snacks, and if you want to see this up close, come take a quick peek. Yeah, we'll talk about it after the break.
Okay, sorry.
No, this is fine. The quick answer is to let something run on time. If we don't let something run, then blooms take a little bit longer to heal. The other trick is using a cut paste that actually has some good hormone in it. So persimmons don't heal very well. But if you use a cut paste like Kikuchi, it will have a hormone that will help heal these problems. It has something that always can eat.
Another one with the green top.
It's an olive green color cut paste. It's in a plastic bottle with kind of like a tube. It's not the bottle that was because that was also that one doesn't look good. We'll see. So we'll talk about that after. I was going to ask you about yes. All right. So we have a little bit of work to do to wrap this guy up. So I saw one cut that we can make a little bit shorter. That was bothering me and some of you. So next thing that we can do is we can address all those big cuts that we made on this tree. We cut a lot on this tree. So I want to use this opportunity to talk a little bit about cut paste and how we can use cut paste. But before we get into cut paste, we're going to take this knob that we cut off and clean this back a little bit more. Now, a lot of times people will ask me, when can I cut this back flush and when do I need to leave a stub? The answer is we need to leave a stub if what we're cutting back to is smaller than where it's coming from. And if we look at this branch here, or really this big trunk line, this cut here is about the same size as this cut line. So I can cut this back safely and not expect any dieback down the tree. If I cut this here and this was about this size, that would be too small for me to cut it back flush. If I cut it back flush, I'd have a high risk of it dying down the side of the trunk. So because this is so big compared to the cut that we made, I can take a knob cutter and cut this back a little bit more. We did this with a saw first just to get the bulk of it off, and then we always use a knob cutter to then come in and do our kind of fine detail. When you're using a knob cutter, I recommend doing more small cuts than trying to do one big massive cut. So it's kind of a nibbling tool. It's not something that you kind of manhandle and try and get perfectly on the first go. You want this to look kind of whittled. So we're going to come in and work this down. Now, whenever we have callus is something, or the thing that grows over a wound, that callus tissue is going to add mass. So if I have a bump on there, if I have this be a convex kind of cut and mass is added to that, then it looks like a big kind of bump on the tree. It's not very sightly. So if I want it to look like it was never there in the first place, I actually have to make a small concavity so that it heals flat. So make a small concavity, the callus adds mass, and we get a nice flat kind of incision. Now, when we have a big cut like this and all the big cuts on the top of this tree, we want to seal just about everything. The only time we don't seal something is if we want death and destruction, or i.e. if we're making deadwood. If we don't seal things, then it's a big open wound. It's like if you just had a big gash in your arm and you didn't go get stitches, you're probably going to get infected. Bad things are going to happen. Versus if you just have a little tiny cut, like when I prune some of these things, I don't necessarily need to seal these really small ones. But any big cut, anything that's kind of bigger than, or big enough for me to actually squirt some cut paste onto, I'm going to go ahead and seal. Now, when we're using cut paste, we want to use something that is going to prevent bad things from getting in. So that means you could basically use an Elmer's glue because an Elmer's glue would prevent any bad things from getting in here. But the benefit to using an actual Japanese cut paste, and this is my favorite one, this is called kirikuchi. Actually, Jay and I had dinner with one of the guys who owns the company that makes this in Japan. But kirikuchi is a product made by a bonsai hobbyist who's a friend of my friend Daisaku Nomoto. So this product is made by a bonsai hobbyist for bonsai. It's very specifically targeted. It has a lot of growth hormone, which is gibberellic acid in there, which creates a really, really strong callus. So if you put this on, you're guaranteed to get some nice healing, even on plants that historically don't heal well. I heard for years that you can't heal a wound on a ginkgo until I used this, and all of a sudden I had a wound this big on a ginkgo that completely closed. Texas persimmons are notorious for not healing well, but if you use this cut paste, it will work pretty well. So I don't really bother buying hardly any other cut paste. You can get this kirikuchi from Jonas at Bonsai Tonight. He's probably the best online store. The good thing about Jonas's website, and you guys are going to see Jonas at the convention in Corpus Christi, so if you don't know who I'm talking about, you'll meet him there. But the good thing about Jonas's website is everything he sells is used by a bonsai professional on a regular basis. He's not selling you cheap stuff that is kind of low quality. And so you might pay just a little bit more for the stuff that you're going to see on his website, but every tool is something that I would buy and use myself, or any bonsai artist in Japan would buy and use themselves. So it's a really, really good place because it's kind of a curated selection of tools, of supplies, of items. And he's one of the main people who sell this kirikuchi cut paste. So again, the reason that we like kirikuchi is that it has that growth hormone in it, the same growth hormone that you find in rooting hormone, coincidentally, because rooting hormone, there's no such thing as root hormone. Root hormone just has a callus hormone, and that's that gibberellic acid that we have. And that hormone just creates a really strong callus. When we're making a cutting, that callus tissue is where new roots come from. But when we're trying to heal a branch, that callus obviously folds over and covers this nicely. So we're doing our little nibbling here. What I want this to look like is I want this to be really nice and smooth. So all the little mountains that I'm creating, I'm going to then kind of whittle those down with this tool. You could even take a knife, but with a good kind of sharp knob cutter like this is, we can kind of start to get this nice and smooth. Doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be kind of mostly perfect. Yep. Yep.
Do you still use that for big wounds?
I still, yeah. If it's a wound kind of bigger than the size of my wrist, I might use this as a base layer and then use a solid cut paste on top of it. But I use this for everything this size and smaller, just about. So it's a really good cut paste for most of the cuts that we're going to make in bonsai. So again, I'm just going to get this really nice and smooth. We have a small concavity here, so when that callus then comes and forms, it's not going to create a huge bump here. And because we're going to use this cut paste that has really nice hormone in it, this is going to heal probably in a few years. Now, something that we can do is when that growth comes, a callus tissue tends to stall after a little bit. You'll get really nice healing for a time or two, and then all of a sudden it kind of just stops and stalls. And when that happens, what we like to do is we take a little metal pick. You can get a little dental pick is a good tool. Talk to Klaus, he can probably get you some dental picks. And that pick can then come in, you can score the inside of that callus where it stopped kind of growing. And then from that area, you can kind of jump start it, just like your car battery when it dies. You can jump start the callus and cause it to heal kind of at the same speed it originally was. So we like to do that this time of year when things are starting to grow pretty actively. to jumpstart a stalled callus. So that's something that you could be doing on your trees right now, is if you have a wound that has stopped kind of healing, take a dental pick or even the tip of a scissors can work. And you can just kind of score around the inside of that callus, put on some fresh cut paste. The other thing that I'll say is most people make the mistake of only putting cut paste around the edge. You want to completely cover that thing. If I have a big gashing wound, I don't want just stitches on the edge. I want that thing fully closed and sealed. Same thing with this. We want it fully covered because I want that cut paste, that callus to kind of chew that cut paste as far as it can. So always do the entire wound with coverage. Any questions about wounds or cut paste? Or
You're not using that specific paste you mentioned. What other paste?
like I said, even just plain Elmer's glue.
Can you mix the growth hormone with that?
Maybe. It might not work as well as this. So for 20 bucks on a tree that I care about, that's worth it to me to just go to Jonas's website and buy the stuff. But you probably can. Now, how much growth hormone to add, I don't know. But these guys have already figured it out. That's why they have a cut paste bottle. But it's really not that expensive for the benefit of it that we get. And every student that I've had who's used this, they see the results. It works. You get what you pay for when you buy it. So.
You prick the callus, are you going through the can? How much are you taking off? Just make a little.
Yeah, good question. When we re-agitate a wound that's kind of stalled, we don't want to remove very much. All you need is a little sliver of green on the perimeter where that callus is stalled. All the way around, yep. And that's, what was that? Yeah, just a millimeter is enough. Just a little sliver of green all the way around, fresh cut paste on top of that, and then it really kind of helps jumpstart and get some healing. Yeah, at least once a year. So, all right, so that's now pretty nicely cut back, and we have all these up here that can now get some sealing. So, looks like this is a new bottle, so oftentimes these have a little plug on the inside. All right. So, and then what I'll do when I get the top on here is get nice kind of full coverage on all these cuts. If you have a tree that calluses really well on its own, like I know you don't have a lot of maples down here, but let's pretend you did. Maple calluses really well on its own, so we don't need a lot of this product. And in fact, if you use a lot of this on a maple, you get a callus that has a kind of a big bulge because this does have a lot of hormone in it. For a persimmon, we're okay with a lot because these don't callus very strongly. In fact, quite the opposite. So I'm okay putting a kind of a fair bit of this on here. Let's see. Sometimes you need to cut the end of this a little bit too. There we go. So we'll get this nicely covered all over that wound. This can drip a little bit, so sometimes what I do is I do kind of 80% coverage, let it kind of settle a little bit, and then if I need a little bit more, I'll come back and get the rest of it. So basically anything that I can see the wound really easily with the naked eye, I'll put cut paste on. So all these kind of big ones on top we'll go ahead and cover. Now, aftercare, like we talked about, whoever ends up winning this thing, definitely do not put this in the full sun. So this needs kind of shady protection. If you have a tree in your yard, maybe underneath a tree, or if you have a nice bonsai setup with 50–60% shade cloth, that can work nicely. Even though it's not the heat of the summer yet, this still needs some protection because the sun's really strong right now. And the other thing is the bark can actually get burned as well, not just the foliage. So we want to protect both the new leaves that we have and the bark. Now,
What does the bark look like when it gets burned?
sometimes it can have a discoloration. Sometimes it doesn't have any look until we see that half the trunk has died. So it's not always a strong visual, but especially on a Texas Persimmon it might not, but if you had a Japanese maple, something that's more delicate, not used to this heat, it definitely can burn really easily.
Andrew,
Yes?
with taking so much of the foliage off,
we wouldn't do anything with the roots, but you brought up a good point. We just took a lot of foliage off. So before, this was maybe getting watered, let's say once a day. Now, because we cut all that foliage off, there's not a lot sucking water out of this pot. So you do not have to water a tree that's been cut back this hard really strongly. Definitely water it, and stick your finger in here. If it feels dry, water it. But this tree does not have a lot of water demand as it did before we cut off all of that foliage. So just be a little bit cautious when you're watering it. The other thing that we'll talk about is fertilizer. So this is a young tree, which means we have a lot of growth and development to happen. Sometimes people were asking earlier, how long is this going to take to look good? It's going to take a long time if we don't give it any fertilizer. I fertilize my trees every single time I water in Oregon. Now, my trees are active during the entire growing season. If I lived here in Texas, I might slow down on certain trees like elms, which might stall out and go into summer dormancy. However, your tropicals don't go into summer dormancy. They keep growing all summer long. So on a ficus, I would be fertilizing that. As much as you see growth, I'd be fertilizing, which is kind of every day from now until November. A plant like this, I would be fertilizing until the growth kind of stalls. We just cut this back a lot. So usually with a big cut back like this, we're going to get a big response. So I expect a really strong push to come out of this tree. You probably won't see that for about 2 weeks, but starting in the 3rd, 4th week, this is going to start to grow a lot. So I would give it some fertilizer. When you get it home, you can even do a lot of fertilizer. You can do full strength Miracle Grow, an application of that once a week. Give or take. With a young tree like this, that can really help. This is also a flowering and fruiting plant. And we were talking a little bit earlier during the break with some people who have Texas persimmons, and they actually think this might be a female. So there might still be some time to buy a raffle ticket in the back if that changes your perspective. But there is a solid chance this is a female based on what we were seeing. So with any flowering and fruiting plant, if you don't give it adequate nutrition, it will not do the thing that it's supposed to do, fruit and flower. So all of my flowering and fruiting plants get extra fertilizer on top of my fertilizer regimen that I normally do with trees. So I mostly use Miracle Grow in my garden. My trees get 1/30th strength Miracle Grow every single time I water, so I'd have to water 30 times for kind of one full strength application. That's just kind of a baseline nutrition because the soils that we use, Akadama and pumice, don't have a lot of nutrition. They have very, very little nutrition in and of themselves. So using a fertilizer every time I water is giving just a little tiny bit to the tree, and it can soak it up. But if you don't have an injection system, just a liquid fertilizer, fish emulsion, Miracle Grow, something like that, once a week watered into the soil for as long as this is actively growing. You can probably stop around July when this goes into summer dormancy and just kind of sits for July, August, September, October, and then start again in the fall when it wakes up again. Yeah.
You were saying about the cedar elms, I understand about the tropical watering it every time.
Yeah.
I think every time the cedar elms now and then stopping them in July.
Yeah, once they go into summer dormancy, again, that's just based on the weather, so it's not some certain date or anything. Once they kind of stall out with their growth, you can back off on the fertilizer, but anything that's going to keep actively growing, so sometimes a Chinese elm can keep actively growing. Either the cedar elms tend to stop, but a Chinese elm can keep actively growing. Sometimes all the ficus and tropicals will keep actively growing. So any of those plants you want to fertilize whenever you're getting the growth.
So the cedar elm is once a week and this time of year or more?
Yeah, once a week or even better, twice a week while it's actively growing. Because you guys have a fairly short growing season with plants like a cedar elm. It's going to grow now for a month or two, and then it's just going to stop and sit there for most of the summer. And so now's the time to really capitalize on fertilizer. So if you're only doing it once a week or even once a month, you're not taking full advantage of the growth that you could be getting. I recommend, while it's actively growing, giving it really good nutrition and then backing off when it slows down.
Is that true also for the ginkgo?
Yes, anything that's kind of non-tropical is going to slow down. So, all right. So we got cut paste on here. We talked about aftercare. We talked about fertilizer, which this tree needs, especially the next few weeks. Once or twice a week is pretty critical. We talked about cut paste. We talked about light that this needs. I would recommend whoever wins this tree repotting it next spring, so next January or February. Kind of late January, early February is a good time to repot these. And And actually, persimmon wakes up later than everything else. So you might be in more mid-late February, depending on what the weather's doing. But that's a great time to go in and repot these plants. When I repot something like this, I'll take probably 80% of the roots off on a piece of nursery stock. Something young and vigorous like this can tolerate that. So as long as we're leaving a fair bit of root, then it should be fine. Again, when you pot this, we take a lot of the soil off this base, and this is actually a really good example. It's possible that the trunk on this tree goes down a fair bit into that soil. With nursery stock, it's always a gamble what you're going to find. I've had a piece of nursery stock where the nabari actually starts halfway down the plant. So rather than start by just cutting half of this off, I find where my nabari is. It looks like Kevin did a little bit of that already to get it started. But I find kind of where my nabari is, where I see roots actually coming off the trunk, take everything down to that level, and that tells you where you can cut. Again, if you don't do that, if my nabari starts all the way down here and I cut here, then I might have just cut all my roots off. So I have to find that first when I do the repotting. Other than that, this is a nice elegant tree, so it can go in a nice elegant pot. Maybe a round kind of glazed pot about this big might look nice for it. Any color you like, something glazed. There's no kind of set rules for deciduous or broadleaf plants. You probably don't want a color that's too similar to the actual plant, so I would avoid this type of green. But other than that, a cream can work really nicely. They kind of have a black fruit, so there's not really a good kind of color to match the black, and any color can really match. But just something, a nice kind of elegant glaze. We don't want the glaze to be too flashy because it's a nice elegant tree, so we don't want the pot to stand out more than the tree itself. But yeah, just any nice glaze that speaks to you is totally fine. So any questions about what we did tonight on this plant? Yeah.
So we talked a little bit, and someone else asked a question about the roots.
Mm-hmm.
The top there was some skinny little roots.
Mm-hmm.
Some, how would you treat those over time? The little thinner roots.
Yeah, some of these roots might need editing. There's some roots that kind of have been eroded and exposed. If we were going in a more traditional context, we would probably want to remove several of those. If you like a lot of gnarliness, you might end up keeping those, but it's really, we gotta kind of see what's down here before we can kind of make too many decisions. But that's one of the biggest sacrifices that we make when we get a piece of nursery stock is usually we're dealing with really, really bad roots. So oftentimes we have to reset the top of the tree, but if we get a piece of nursery stock, sometimes we even consider resetting the bottom, which means maybe if you don't like this, maybe doing an air layer or ground layer down here if you're going for that really high quality tree down the road. We don't always have to do that, it just kind of depends, but we're kind of playing the lottery whenever we get a piece of nursery stock because most of the times these are not very well grown. They're kind of jammed in a pot, the roots are kind of circling and tangling, and those aren't the roots that we kind of want for bonsai. So, other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. After collecting a Texas Persimmon, sometimes it takes forever to push out growth.
Mm-hmm.
And then there'll be like maybe 2 years and it still has to push growth, but it's still green.
Mm-hmm.
And then third year it has to push growth, or maybe very little. Do you know what could be the problem, or?
No, I don't. But persimmons are more temperamental than something like a ficus. So that's why we are a little bit more conservative when we're pruning. Now, a piece of nursery stock, you're probably going to have less issues with that than a wild collected tree. But yeah, I don't have a good reason why. But keep up with it. I think if you're collecting a persimmon like this, it's a good idea to have it on a heat pad for several weeks to really stimulate some root growth right away. And then just keep good aftercare, good fertilizer, and just be patient. We have in our little study group, we've seen princess persimmon that come down here that don't grow for an entire year. So they can be a little bit more finicky. This is not a ficus. So, other questions? Yeah.
For the kitty
Mhm.
how much is a bottle and you have to reapply it?
It's $20 a bottle, and you can buy it from Jonas at bonsaitonight.com. So he's sold out. Yeah. Yeah. It might be $24 a bottle soon. So be prepared for that. But yeah, if he has it sold out, I'm sure he's going to have it in stock soon because it's one of his best-selling cut pastes. So I don't know of any other vendors that sell it. There might be, so you might just Google Kirikuchi. Kirikuchi Nauru is the full name. You could take a photo of it with your iPhone and put that into a Google image search, and that can see if there's any other vendors that have it. Or you can ask ChatGPT, that probably can tell you too. So. What was that? Usually you just apply it one time. You only reapply it if you re-agitate a callus that's started to grow. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Is there an expiration date on that?
What was that?
An expiration date on it?
Expiration, not really. What you don't want is to you don't want to just sit it in the sun and have it kind of bake. So just as long as you keep it in a cool, dry place, it should be fine. So, yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
We're talking about supplies.
Yeah.
Without going online, I'm really new to this. So is there anywhere here in San Antonio where we can get supplies?
I recommend Jonas at Bonsai tonight. Not just because he's a friend, but honestly, even if I didn't like him, I would be buying stuff from him because, like I said, he's buying stuff that bonsai professionals use. If you buy a tool from Jonas, it's not going to be a tool that you'll throw away. It's a tool that you can use for kind of your entire bonsai career if it's well taken care of. If you buy a cut paste, it's going to be one of the good ones that have some good growth hormone. He doesn't sell kind of cheap stuff that's, it's not that he's that much more expensive. For Kanishin is the brand that I like. So for a Kanishin concave cutter or knob cutter, you might spend $60 with Jonas, maybe $65 now. But $60 from Jonas, you get a Joshua Roth one for probably $40, but that $40 one's a piece of crap that's going to last for, I don't know, a couple of years. And it's a mass-produced kind of Chinese one versus the Kanishin one is handmade in Japan, and it'll last kind of a lifetime, well taken care of. So 360, all right. There's our masterpiece tree. Like I said, this is one contribution in our aesthetic 401k. If we keep doing good work on this tree, this has good hope to be a really nice bonsai, nice elegant tree. So I like this one quite a bit. So, all right, is it raffle time? Thank you. Thank you.